Part 1. The Entrance. What is time? The Swiss Alps rise majestically against the dawn sky as the first rays of sunlight pierce through morning mist surrounding the CERN research facility. Massive concrete structures stand like monoliths against a natural landscape, testament to humanity's quest to understand the fundamental nature of reality. Deep within the particle physics laboratory, Dr. Sarah Chin stands before a wall of monitors displaying cascading data streams. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes carry the intensity of someone who has spent years pursuing answers to questions most people never think to ask. She wears a white lab coat over jeans and a faded t-shirt bearing Einstein's famous equation. The laboratory resembles a cathedral of modern science. Massive superconducting magnets line the walls, their surfaces gleaming like metallic organs. Cables snake across the floor and ceiling in organized chaos, carrying power and data to instruments that peer into the very fabric of space-time. The air hums with the barely audible vibration of machinery operating at the limits of human engineering. Sarah's fingers dance across a holographic interface, adjusting parameters for her experiment. Numbers and equations float in the air before her, three-dimensional representations of mathematical concepts that describe the behavior of matter and energy at scales so small they exist more as probability clouds than discrete objects. Temporal variance in the quantum field, still within acceptable parameters, she mutters to herself. Dr. James Corver, her research partner, approaches carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He's a bear of a man with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Where Sarah embodies intensity, James radiates calm reliability. Another all-nighter? Sarah, when was the last time you actually went home? Sarah accepts the coffee gratefully. Time is relative, James. Besides, we're so close to understanding the quantum gravitational interface that an alarm begins to sound. Not the sharp, urgent blast of an emergency, but a deep, resonant tone that seems to vibrate through the very structure of the building. Both scientists freeze, their eyes immediately drawn to the central monitor. What the hell is that? James asks. Sarah rushes to the main console. The data streams on her monitors have begun to behave erratically. Numbers that should follow predictable patterns are jumping wildly, as if the fundamental constants of physics are fluctuating. The containment field is, this can't be right. The temporal measurements are showing impossible readings. She types rapidly, pulling up diagnostic screens. The particle beam that should be traveling in a perfect circle through the accelerator is exhibiting behavior that defies every known law of physics. Instead of maintaining a constant speed, it appears to be accelerating and decelerating randomly, as if time itself is flowing at different rates within different sections of the accelerator ring. James points to a screen showing gravitational wave detectors. Sarah, look at this. The sensors, designed to detect ripples in space-time caused by massive cosmic events, are registering disturbances that seem to originate from within their own laboratory. That's impossible. We're not generating enough energy to affect space-time geometry. The mass energy involved in our experiment is... Sarah stops mid-sentence. On the screen before her, she watches as a timestamp on the data begins to stutter. 9 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds. 9 hours, 47 minutes, and 22 seconds. 9 hours, 47 minutes, and 24 seconds. 9 hours, 47 minutes, and 21 seconds. Time itself appears to be hiccuping. What is time? She whispers. The question hangs in the air like a prayer. It's the question that has driven her since graduate school. The question that made her choose theoretical physics over more practical pursuits. The question that has cost her relationships and sleep, and sometimes her sanity. James moves to the emergency shutdown controls, but Sarah catches his arm. Wait, don't shut it down yet. Sarah, we don't know what's happening. If we're somehow affecting local space-time, exactly, we're seeing something no one has ever seen before. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. She turns back to the monitors, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. The data streams continue their chaotic dance, but gradually Sarah begins to see patterns within the chaos. The temporal fluctuations aren't random. They're following a complex but discernible rhythm, like the beating of some cosmic heart. James, look at this. The temporal distortions are creating a resonance pattern. It's almost like the space-time around our experiment is breathing. As she speaks, something extraordinary begins to happen. The air in the center of the laboratory starts to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But this is different. The shimmer has a quality that seems to bend not just light, but perception itself. Sarah, step away from the equipment. James warns. But Sarah is transfixed. Within the shimmer, she begins to see glimpses of something. Not images, exactly, but impressions. Fragments of moments that feel both familiar and impossible. She sees herself as a child, reading about time travel in science fiction novels. She sees her grandmother's clock, its pendulum marking seconds that seem to last forever during boring Sunday afternoons. She sees her first physics class, where Professor Martinez introduced her to Einstein's special relativity and showed her that time was not the rigid, universal framework she had always assumed it to be. I can see the past, but not just my past. It's like I'm seeing the history of the question itself. Every human being who has ever wondered about the nature of time. The shimmer begins to solidify, taking on the appearance of a doorway. Not a door in any conventional sense, but an opening in reality itself. Through it, Sarah glimpses corridors that stretch away into impossible distances, lit by a light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah, whatever you're thinking, don't. We need to document this. Study it carefully. We can't just... What if this is why I became a physicist? What if everything, my childhood fascination with time, my struggles with quantum mechanics, even this moment, what if it's all been leading to this? She steps closer to the shimmering portal. As she does, she feels a strange sensation, as if she's being gently pulled forward by invisible hands. The world around her begins to feel less solid, more like a dream or a memory. Augustine asked a question 1,500 years ago. What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to someone who asks, I do not know. Einstein showed us that time is relative, that it can stretch and compress. But neither of them could see this. The portal pulses with energy, and Sarah feels time itself flowing around her like water. She understands, with a certainty that transcends rational thought, that stepping through this doorway will change everything. Not just her understanding of physics, but her understanding of what it means to exist as a conscious being in a temporal universe. Sarah, please, think about what you're doing. She turns to face James. I am thinking, James. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. We spend our lives measuring time, quantifying it, breaking it down into equations and constants. But we never ask a real question. What does it mean to be a being that exists in time? She looks back at the portal, and in its depths, she sees something that takes her breath away. She sees a labyrinth, an infinite maze of corridors and chambers, each one representing a different way of understanding temporal existence. She sees paths that lead to encounters with the greatest minds in history, spaces where the laws of physics become fluid and negotiable, and ultimately, a journey toward a deeper understanding of her own nature as a temporal being. Time isn't just a dimension we move through. It's the medium in which consciousness exists. And if we want to understand consciousness, if we want to understand ourselves, we have to be willing to step outside our comfortable assumptions about what time is and how it works. The laboratory around her begins to feel increasingly insubstantial, like a stage set that's about to be struck. She realizes that the world she's known, the world of precise measurements and predictable equations, is just one small corner of a much larger reality. If you go through there, I don't know if you'll be able to come back, James says desperately. Sarah smiles with a mixture of fear and excitement. Maybe coming back isn't the point. Maybe the point is finally moving forward. She takes a deep breath and steps toward the portal. As her foot crosses the threshold, she feels herself being pulled into a space that exists between moments, between heartbeats, between thoughts. The last thing she sees is James reaching toward her, his face a mask of concern and wonder. Sarah, his voice already sounds far away, echoing from a world that is rapidly becoming just another memory in the vast library of experiences that consciousness carries through time. As Sarah passes completely through the portal, she finds herself in a place that defies description. She is standing in what appears to be a corridor, but the walls seem to be made of crystallized time itself. Transparent surfaces that show glimpses of past and future moments like windows into parallel realities. The corridor stretches away in both directions, curving gently so that she cannot see where it ends. The floor beneath her feet feels solid enough, but when she looks down, she sees that she is walking on a surface that shows the movement of galaxies, the birth and death of stars, the slow dance of cosmic evolution. What is this place? She wonders aloud. As if in response to her question, words appear in the air before her, written in letters of light. Welcome to the Labyrinth of Time. Here, every question leads to deeper questions, and every answer reveals new mysteries. You have entered a space where the boundaries between physics and philosophy, between science and consciousness, become permeable. Your journey will take you through encounters with minds that have grappled with the nature of temporal existence across centuries and cultures. But remember, the labyrinth is not just a place you explore. It is a process you undergo. You will not leave this place the same person who entered it. Sarah reads the words twice, then watches as they fade away like morning mist. She looks around, trying to get her bearings in this impossible space. The corridor ahead splits into multiple paths, each one glowing with a different quality of light. She understands intuitively that each path represents a different approach to understanding time: physical, philosophical, existential, spiritual. For a moment, she feels overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she has undertaken. Then she remembers why she became a physicist in the first place: the desire to understand the deepest truths about reality, even if those truths challenge everything she thought she knew. All right then, let's see what time really is. She chooses the path that glows with a silver light reminiscent of starlight and begins walking deeper into the labyrinth. With each step, she feels herself moving not just through space, but through layers of understanding that she never knew existed. Behind her, the entrance through which she came begins to fade, becoming just another doorway in an infinite maze of possibilities. She is committed now to whatever journey lies ahead, ready to discover what it truly means to exist as a conscious being in the flowing river of time. The corridor ahead stretches into mystery, promising revelations that will transform her understanding of both the universe and herself. Part 2, the relativistic corridor. Time dilates, space contracts. Sarah walks forward along the silver-lit path, her footsteps echoing strangely in the impossible space. The corridor around her begins to change as she moves deeper into the labyrinth. What started as a simple passageway now stretches and compresses with each step she takes, the walls breathing like living tissue. She notices something extraordinary. Clocks of every conceivable design line the walls. Ancient sundials sit next to digital chronometers. Pendulum clocks tick alongside atomic frequency standards, but none of them show the same time. As Sarah walks past, she sees some ticking faster, others slower, and some that seem to run backward entirely. This can't be right. They should all be synchronized, she murmurs, examining an ornate grandfather clock. As she speaks, the corridor ahead of her begins to stretch impossibly long, the far end receding into a vanishing point that seems infinitely distant. Then, with her next step, it snaps back to normal proportions, only to compress so drastically that she feels she could reach out and touch what moments before had been hundreds of yards away. A gentle voice speaks behind her, tinged with a slight German accent and carrying the warmth of amused wisdom. Ah, but what does should mean in a universe where simultaneity is relative? Sarah spins around to see a figure emerging from what appears to be a fold in space-time itself. It is Albert Einstein, but not quite as history remembers him. He appears to exist at multiple ages simultaneously. Sometimes a young patent clerk with unruly dark hair, sometimes a world-famous physicist with his iconic white mustache, sometimes the elder statesman of science with penetrating eyes that have seen the deepest truths of the cosmos. Dr. Chun, I presume, your reputation precedes you, though in this place, I suppose reputation is as relative as everything else. He smiles gently. Professor Einstein, but you're... Sarah struggles with her, all while trying to maintain scientific composure. Dead? Yes, quite thoroughly so, in your frame of reference. But here in the labyrinth, linear causality becomes rather more flexible. I am both the Einstein who was, and the Einstein who might have been, and perhaps even the Einstein who never was but should have been. He gestures to the corridor around them, which continues its strange dance of expansion and contraction. You see, my dear colleague, what you are experiencing here is not metaphor. It is a literal truth that space and time are not the fixed stage upon which the drama of physics plays out. They are players in the drama themselves. As he speaks, Sarah notices that her own perception of time is becoming fluid. Moments seem to stretch and compress independent of the physical changes in the corridor. She finds herself remembering her first encounter with special relativity as if it were happening now, while simultaneously experiencing it as a distant memory and a future possibility. But this is impossible. The energy requirements alone to warp space-time to this degree. Einstein chuckles. Impossible? My dear Sarah, you are thinking like someone trapped in Newtonian absolutism. Tell me, what did you think was impossible before you discovered that mass and energy are equivalent? Before you learned that nothing can travel faster than light? Before you realized that gravity is not a force but the curvature of space-time itself? He walks alongside her as they continue down the corridor. With each step, Sarah notices that Einstein's appearance shifts subtly. Now he is a young theoretical physicist working on special relativity, his eyes bright with the excitement of revolutionary discovery. In 1905, I published a paper that shattered humanity's conception of absolute time. I showed that time is not a river flowing uniformly for all observers, but rather a dimension intimately connected to space, stretchable and compressible depending on one's motion to the cosmos. The walls around them begin to display visual representations of his theories. Sarah sees light cones extending into four-dimensional space-time, world lines of particles traced through the fabric of reality, and the elegant mathematics that describes how time dilates and length contracts as velocities approach the speed of light. Yes, I know the theory, but experiencing it like this, it's as if the mathematics has become alive. Sarah observes, studying the visualizations. Mathematics is alive, Sarah. Numbers are not mere symbols. They are the language in which the universe speaks to itself. When you write E equals mc squared, you are not creating an abstraction. You are revealing a truth that was always there, waiting to be discovered. As they walk, Sarah notices that the clocks on the walls begin to make sense. She realizes that they are not malfunctioning. They are showing the proper time for observers moving at different velocities relative to the corridor itself. A clock attached to a particle moving at 90% the speed of light ticks much slower than one at rest. Time dilation is not just a theoretical concept here. It is a lived, experiential reality. But Professor, if time is relative, then what is the meaning of simultaneity? How can we say that two events happen at the same time if time itself depends on the observer's reference frame? Einstein appears now as a mature physicist who developed general relativity. Now you're asking the right questions. Simultaneity is indeed relative, but this does not mean that there is no objective reality. It means that objective reality is richer and stranger than our intuitive notions of time and space suggest. The corridor opens into a vast chamber where Sarah can see multiple versions of herself moving along different world lines through space-time. Some versions are moving slowly, aging at normal rates. Others are traveling at high velocities, their biological processes slowed by time dilation. She watches, fascinated, as these different versions of herself age at different rates, their personal timelines diverging based on their motion through the cosmos. What you are seeing here is the block universe, the four-dimensional structure of space-time in which all events, past, present, and future, exist simultaneously. From this perspective, temporal becoming is not fundamental. What we experience as a flow of time is simply our movement through the static four-dimensional structure of reality. Sarah struggles with the implications. But if that's true, then free will, consciousness, the experience of choosing, are they all illusions? Einstein pauses thoughtfully. This is where physics reaches its limits, and philosophy must take up the torch. I can tell you what the mathematics reveals about the structure of space-time, but I cannot tell you what it means to be a conscious being experiencing that structure from within. As he speaks, the chamber around them begins to exhibit the effects of general relativity. Sarah feels the floor beneath her feet curve, and she realizes that she is standing on a massive gravitational body that is warping space-time itself. Time flows more slowly at her feet than at her head, Gravitational time dilation made manifest. This is incredible. You're showing me that time is not just relative to velocity, but to gravity as well. The stronger the gravitational field, the slower time flows. Einstein now appears as the elder physicist, with the weight of years and wisdom in his eyes. Indeed, and this leads to perhaps the most profound realization of all, time and space are not separate entities. They are aspects of a single, unified fabric, space-time. Matter and energy do not exist in space-time. They are manifestations of space-time's curvature. Sarah watches as the visualization around her demonstrates this principle. She sees how massive objects create depressions in the fabric of space-time, how these depressions guide the motion of other objects, creating what we experience as gravitational attraction. The elegant dance of planets around stars, stars around galactic centers, galaxies through the cosmic web, all of it is geometry, the natural consequence of matter and energy curving the very medium in which they exist. But there's something that troubles me, Sarah admits. If space-time is a unified fabric, if past, present, and future all exist equally in the block universe, then what happens to causality? What prevents effects from preceding their causes? Einstein's form shift again, and she sees him as he was during his later years, grappling with the quantum mechanical revolution that his own work had helped initiate. You touch upon one of the deepest mysteries. The structure of space-time does impose constraints, light cones that separate past from future, that preserve causal ordering for all observers despite the relativity of simultaneity. But even these constraints reveal something profound about the nature of reality. The chamber transforms around them, showing the intricate geometry of light cones extending through four-dimensional space-time. Sarah sees how every event is connected to every other event through these cone-shaped regions of causal influence, creating a vast web of interconnection that spans the entire universe. Every event in the universe is connected to every other event through this causal structure, Einstein explains. The light that left a distant star billions of years ago becomes part of your causal past the moment it reaches your eye. In this sense, the history of the cosmos is not separate from your personal history. It is woven into the very fabric of your existence. Sarah feels a deep sense of vertigo, not from the warped geometry around her, but from the implications of what she's learning. So when I look at a star, I'm not just seeing distant light. I'm participating in a causal relationship that spans billions of years. Precisely. And this reveals something crucial about the nature of observation and consciousness. You are not a passive observer of the universe. You are an active participant in its ongoing creation. Every measurement you make, every observation you conduct, becomes part of the universe's structure. The chamber continues to evolve, showing Sarah glimpses of even stranger phenomena. She sees closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, theoretically allowing travel into one's own past. She witnesses the birth and death of virtual particles in the quantum foam that underlies all of space-time, matter and antimatter arising from and return to the void in cycles measured in the smallest possible units of time. These phenomena seem to challenge everything we think we know about cause and effect, about the arrow of time, Sarah observes. They do indeed, and this is why your journey through the labyrinth cannot end with physics alone. The mathematical description of space-time is precise and elegant, but it is also, in some fundamental sense, incomplete. It tells us how events are related to one another, but it cannot tell us why there is something rather than nothing, or what it feels like to be a conscious observer moving through this four-dimensional structure. Einstein's form begins to fade, becoming translucent like starlight. The path you have chosen will lead you deeper into these questions. You will encounter minds that approach the mystery of time from directions I never explored. But remember what you have learned here. Time is not the enemy of eternity. It is eternity's most profound expression. In the marriage of space and time, in the dance of matter and geometry, the universe reveals its deepest nature. As Einstein's presence fades completely, Sarah finds herself alone in the relativistic chamber. The visualizations continue to play around her, the eternal dance of space-time geometry, the interplay of matter and energy, the elegant mathematical relationships that govern the cosmos at its most fundamental level. She understands now that her journey has only begun. The physical nature of time, as revealed by Einstein's theories, has shown her that reality is far stranger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined, but it has also raised questions that physics alone cannot answer. What does it mean to exist as a conscious being in this four-dimensional block universe? How does the subjective experience of temporal flow relate to the objective structure of space-time? The silver light that has been guiding her begins to shift, taking on new hues that suggest different modes of inquiry. She sees paths leading away from the relativistic chamber toward regions of the labyrinth where other great minds wait to share their insights into the nature of temporal existence. With a deep sense of gratitude for what she has learned and anticipation for what lies ahead, Sarah chooses her next path and continues deeper into the mystery of time. The relativistic corridor has transformed her understanding of the physical universe, but she senses that the most profound revelations still await her in the depths of the labyrinth. Part 3. The Augustinian Garden. Memory, attention, expectation. Sarah follows a path that glows with warm, golden light, leaving behind the geometrical abstractions of Einstein's relativistic chamber. As she walks, the metallic surfaces and mathematical visualizations gradually give way to something entirely different. The gentle sounds of flowing water, the rustle of leaves, and the sweet fragrance of flowering plants carried on a soft breeze. She emerges into a garden that seems to exist outside the ordinary constraints of season and geography. Ancient olive trees with their gnarled, silver-touched bark stand beside roses in full bloom. Herb gardens release the scents of lavender, rosemary, and thyme into the air, while fruit trees heavy with apples, figs, and pomegranates create a canopy overhead. Yet this is no ordinary botanical space. The very light here seems different, carrying within a quality that suggests the golden hour of late afternoon, when the sun hangs low and every leaf seems aglow with inner fire. At the center of the garden stands a fountain unlike any Sarah has ever seen. Its water appears to flow upward and downward simultaneously, creating patterns that shift between the crystalline clarity of the present moment and the misty indistinctness of memory and anticipation. As she approaches, she realizes that the fountain's surface reflects not just her current appearance, but glimpses of herself at different ages. As a child wondering about the stars, as a student grappling with her first physics equations, as the woman she might become. Seated on a stone bench beside the fountain is a figure in simple robes, his dark skin weathered by both desert sun and years of contemplation. His eyes hold depths that suggest someone who has looked unflinchingly into the mysteries of existence and found there both anguish and profound joy. This is Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's most influential theologians and philosophers, though here he seems to embody something larger than any single religious tradition, the human soul's encounter with the infinite. Augustine looks up as Sarah approaches, and his face breaks into a smile of recognition and welcome. Dr. Chun, I have been expecting you, though expecting is perhaps not the right word in this place where time reveals its true nature. I have been remembering that you would arrive, attending to your arrival, and anticipating what we might discover together about the great mystery. Professor Augustine, Sarah says, still adjusting to the ease with which she encounters these towering figures from history. I've read your confessions, your thoughts on the nature time, but I have to admit, after what I've just experienced with Einstein's theories, I'm not sure how to reconcile the physical and philosophical approaches to temporality. Augustine gestures for her to sit beside him on the bench. Ah, but that is precisely why you are here. The learned Professor Einstein showed you the mathematical structure of time, how it curves and flows, how it relates to space and matter. But mathematics, however elegant, cannot capture the full mystery of what it means to live in time, to experience duration, to be a creature caught between memory and hope. As he speaks, the garden around them seems to respond to his words. The trees shift subtly, their leaves showing progression of seasons in gentle waves. Spring's tender green deepening to summer's full foliage, then transformation to autumn's gold and red, and finally winter's bare branches that somehow promise spring's return. Yet all seasons exist simultaneously, a visual representation of Augustine's insight into the nature of temporal consciousness. Tell me, Augustine continues, when you experienced Einstein's block universe, when you saw past, present, and future laid out as a static four-dimensional structure, did that mathematical truth diminish your experience of this moment? Did knowing that your childhood exists somewhere in space-time Make it feel less past, less formative of who you are now. Sarah considers the question deeply. No, it didn't. If anything, it made my memories feel more real, more substantial, but also more puzzling. If my childhood exists eternally in the block universe, what does it mean for me to remember it? What is memory if the past isn't truly gone? Augustine's eyes light up with the joy of a teacher whose student has grasped the essential question. Precisely. This is where we must move beyond the physicist's external view of time to examine time as it is lived, experienced, felt in the depths of consciousness. For you see, my dear Sarah, there are not three times, past, present, and future. There is only one time, the present. But this present contains within itself three modes of experience. He stands and walks to the fountain, gesturing for Sarah to join him. As they look into its flowing surface, the water begins to reveal images that correspond to his words. The present of past things, this is memory. The fountain's surface shows Sarah's childhood laboratory, where she first became fascinated with the workings of mechanical clocks, taking apart her grandmother's old timepiece to understand precise dance of gears and springs that mark the passage of seconds. The present of present things, this is attention. Now the water shows this very moment. Augustine and Sarah standing by the fountain, but with an intensity and clarity that makes Sarah realize how rarely she truly attends to the fullness of any given moment, how often her mind scatters between memory and anticipation. The present of future things, this is expectation. Finally, the fountain reveals glimpses of possible futures. Sarah returning to her laboratory with transformed understanding. Sarah teaching others what she has learned. Sarah growing old with wisdom hard-won through this journey into time's labyrinth. You see, Augustine says, his voice carrying both the weight of personal struggle and the lightness of hard-won peace. Time is not something we observe from the outside. Time is the medium of consciousness itself. We do not exist in time. We are temporal beings. Our very existence is constituted by this constant weaving together of memory, attention, and expectation. Sarah stares into the fountain's depths, seeing her own life reflected back to her as a temporal tapestry. But this raises a troubling question. If consciousness creates time through this integration of past, present, and future, then what happens when consciousness ends? Does time cease to exist? And what about before consciousness emerged in the universe? Was there no time then? Augustine turns from the fountain to face her directly, and Sarah sees in his expression the depth of someone who has wrestled with ultimate questions. These are the questions that drove me to my knees in prayer and lifted me to my feet in wonder. Let me tell you what I discovered in my own journey through the labyrinth of temporality. The garden around them shifts, becoming more intimate, more enclosed. They are now in what appears to be Augustine's study. Scrolls and codices line the walls. A writing desk bears the marks of countless hours of contemplation, and oil lamps cast dancing shadows that seem to embody the flickering nature of human understanding. In my youth, I was tormented by the question of divine eternity versus temporal existence. How can eternal God act in time? How could the infinite intersect with the finite? I was caught between the Manichaean vision of cosmic struggle playing out in time and the Neoplatonic vision of timeless perfection that rendered temporal existence illusory. Sarah listens intently as Augustine's personal struggle illuminates the philosophical dimensions of her own quest. She realizes that her scientific search for nature-time is part of a much older human endeavor to understand our place in the cosmos. What I came to understand, Augustine continues, is that time and eternity are not opposed to each other. Rather, time is how finite consciousness participates in the infinite. Through memory, we transcend the mere succession of moments by preserving the past within the present. Through attention, we touch the eternal now that underlies all temporal flow. Through expectation, we reach toward the future that calls us beyond our current limitations. The study around them begins to expand again, becoming a vast library that seems to contain every human attempt to understand temporal existence. Sarah sees shelves stretching into infinite distance, filled with the works of philosophers, scientists, mystics, and poets who have all grappled with time's mystery. But here's what I learned that your Professor Einstein, for all his genius, could not teach you. Time is not merely a dimension in which events occur. Time is the very structure of love. Think about it. When you love someone, you gather their past into your present through memory. Their childhood, their struggles, their moments of joy and sorrow all become part of your attention to who they are now. And your love reaches toward their future, hoping for their flourishing, their growth, their ultimate happiness. As Augustine speaks, Sarah feels a profound shift in her understanding. She has been approaching time as a problem to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled through analysis. But Augustine is showing her that time might be less a problem than a gift, the very condition that makes love, growth, and meaning possible. So consciousness doesn't just create time. Sarah says slowly, working through the implications. Consciousness loves through time. And perhaps the universe itself has a kind of consciousness, a way of gathering its past, attending to its present, and reaching toward its future. Augustine's face radiates joy at her insight. Now you begin to see the cosmic story that your physicists tell, the birth of the universe in a primordial explosion, the slow evolution of matter into complexity, the emergence of life and consciousness. This is not just a sequence of physical events. It is the universe's own temporal consciousness coming into being, learning to remember its origins, attend to its present possibilities, and reach towards ultimate destiny. The library around them transforms once more, becoming a space that bridges the natural and the supernatural, the scientific and the spiritual. Through great windows, Sarah can see both the cosmic dance of galaxies that Einstein revealed and something more, patterns of meaning and purpose that weave through the physical processes, giving them direction and significance. But this raises another question, Sarah says, her scientific mind still probing. If the universe has this kind of temporal consciousness, what about suffering? What about the apparent meaninglessness of so much that happens? How do we reconcile the vision of cosmic purpose with the reality of chaos and pain? Augustine's expression grows serious, and Sarah sees in his eyes a reflection of his own encounters with loss and disillusionment. You asked a question that drove me to write the confessions that led to my years of spiritual crisis. Let me share with you what I learned about time and suffering. The space around them darkens, not with the absence of light, but with the presence of deeper shadows that reveal hidden depths. Sarah feels herself being drawn into Augustine's own memories, his grief at the death of a beloved friend, his struggles with desire and spiritual longing, his years of searching for meaning in a world that often seemed indifferent to human hopes. I came to understand that suffering is not the opposite of meaning. It is meaning's most profound teacher. In times of loss and pain, we are forced to confront the reality of our temporal existence. We cannot escape into illusions of permanence or control. We must face the fact that we are finite beings reaching toward infinite significance. Sarah experiences this insight not just intellectually but viscerally, feeling the weight of her own temporal finitude, her own mortality, her own deep longing for meaning that transcends the mere passage of moments. But here's the paradox I discovered. Augustine continues, his voice now carrying the authority of hard-won wisdom. It is precisely our finitude that makes our existence meaningful. If we were eternal beings, existing outside of time, our choices would have no weight, our love would have no urgency, our growth would have no direction. Time is not the enemy of meaning. Time is meaning's necessary condition. The shadows around them begin to lift, replaced by a light that seems to come from within the very fabric of existence itself. Not the harsh glare of scientific analysis, but the gentle radiance of understanding that has been tested by experience and refined by suffering. This is what I mean when I speak of the present moment as the intersection of eternity and time, Augustine explains. In each moment of genuine attention, when we truly see another person, when we experience beauty that takes our breath away, when we feel the weight of moral responsibility, when we touch something that transcends our individual existence, we participate in eternal while remaining fully temporal beings. Sarah finds herself thinking of moments in her own life when she had experienced what Augustine describes, standing before a particularly elegant equation that seemed to reveal the hidden order reality, holding her nephew as a newborn and feeling connected to the vast human story, gazing at the night sky and experiencing both her own smallness and a profound connection to the cosmos. I'm beginning to understand, Sarah says. Einstein showed me that time is relative, that it's woven together with space and matter in ways I never imagined. But you're showing me that time is also personal, subjective, experienced. And more than that, you're suggesting that these aren't contradictory truths, but complementary ones. Exactly. The physicist's time and the lived time of consciousness are both real, both necessary for understanding our place in the cosmos. But there is more. Augustine gestures, and the space around him transforms into what appears to be a vast amphitheater where representatives of every human culture and tradition are gathered, each sharing their own understanding of temporal existence. Sarah sees shamans speaking of sacred time that breaks into ordinary duration, bringing healing and wisdom. She observes Buddhist monks describing the illusion of temporal becoming and the eternal present of enlightened awareness. She witnesses indigenous elders explaining cyclical time that connects the ancestors with generations yet unborn. She notices musicians and poets who understand how rhythm and meter can make temporal experience into art, transforming mere succession into meaningful pattern. Every human culture has grappled with the mystery of time, Augustine observes, and each has discovered essential truths. But what unites all these discoveries is the recognition that time is not just a container in which things happen. Time is a medium through which meaning emerges. As Sarah listens to the diverse voices in the amphitheater, she begins to see how her own scientific quest fits into this larger human story. Science is not separate from the spiritual and cultural dimensions of temporal experience. It is one crucial strand in humanity's ongoing attempt to understand what it means to exist as conscious beings in a temporal universe. But Augustine, Sarah says, there's something that still troubles me. If time is so intimately connected with consciousness and meaning, what about the vast stretches of cosmic history before consciousness emerged? What about the billions of years when the universe existed without any beings capable of memory, attention, and expectation? Augustine's expression becomes contemplative, and Sarah senses that she has touched upon one of the deepest mysteries he has wrestled with. This question leads us to the very edge of what human understanding can grasp. But let me share with you the insight that came to me through years of prayer and contemplation. The amphitheater around them fades, replaced by a space that seems to exist at the intersection of the natural and supernatural worlds. Here, Sarah could perceive not just the physical processes that govern cosmic evolution, but something more subtle, patterns of potentiality and actualization that seem to guide the universe's development toward increasing complexity and consciousness. I came to understand that consciousness did not emerge accidentally from unconscious matter. Rather, the universe has been pregnant with consciousness from the very beginning. The same principles that govern the temporal experience of finite minds, the integration of past achievements, present possibilities, and future goals. These principles have been at work throughout cosmic history, guiding the evolution of matter toward forms capable of memory, attention, and expectation. Sarah feels her scientific worldview expanding to accommodate this vision. She thinks of the fine-tuning of physical constants that made the emergence of complex chemistry possible, the self-organizing processes that led from simple molecules to living cells, the evolutionary pressures that favored increasingly sophisticated forms of information processing and response. So you're suggesting that the universe itself has been developing the capacity for temporal consciousness, that our human experience of time is a universe becoming aware of its own temporal nature? Precisely. And this means that when you study the nature of time as a physicist, when you discover the mathematical relationships that govern temporal processes, you are not just accumulating abstract knowledge. You are participating in the universe's own self-understanding. Your consciousness is how the cosmos comes to know itself as a temporal reality. The implications of this insight wash over Sarah like a wave. Her entire scientific career, her dedication to understanding the fundamental nature of reality, her willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for pursuit of truth, all of this takes on new meaning when understood as the universe's own quest for self-knowledge. But this raises yet another question, Sarah says, her mind racing with possibilities. If the universe is developing toward greater consciousness and self-understanding, what is the ultimate purpose of this process? Where is it all heading? Augustine's eyes twinkle with the joy of someone who's been waiting for exactly this question. Now we approach the deepest mystery of all. In my own life, I discovered that the ultimate purpose of temporal existence is not to escape time, but to perfect our capacity for temporal love. The goal is not timeless eternity, but eternal time, existence in which the integration of memory, attention, and expectation becomes perfect, in which every moment is experienced with complete fullness, and every being is loved with complete understanding. As he speaks, The space around them becomes a vision of this perfected temporal existence. Sarah sees not a static heaven outside of time, but a dynamic reality in which conscious beings continue to grow, to love, to discover, but without the limitations and distortions that characterize temporal existence as we know it. She sees communities of finite beings who have learned to integrate their individual temporal consciousness into larger patterns of meaning and love, creating symphonies of experience that honor both unity and diversity. This vision, Augustine continues, transforms how we understand our present temporal existence. We are not trapped in time, waiting to escape into eternity. We are learning to love through time, developing capacities that will allow us to participate in the universe's ultimate destiny. Sarah feels the profound implications of this vision settling into her consciousness. Her scientific work, her relationships, her struggles with meaning and purpose, all of these take on cosmic significance when understood as part of the universe's journey toward perfected temporal consciousness. So the laboratory where I work, the equations I study, the friendships I form, the choices I make, these aren't just personal experiences, but part of this larger cosmic process. Every genuine encounter with truth, every authentic relationship, every moment of real love or beauty or goodness, these are how the universe practices for its ultimate destiny. And every failure, every moment of selfishness or blindness or despair, these are the growing pains of the cosmos learning what it means to exist consciously in time. As Augustine speaks these words, Sarah feels a fundamental shift in her understanding of her own existence. The anxiety she has carried about the meaning of her life, the fear that her individual existence might be insignificant against the vast backdrop of cosmic space and time. These concerns dissolve in the recognition that her life is not separate from the cosmic story, but an essential part of it. The garden setting returns around them, but now Sarah sees it with transformed eyes. Every flower, every tree, every play of light and shadow represents a universe's ongoing experiment with beauty. Its development of the capacity to create and appreciate forms that transcend mere utility. The fountain at the center, with its mysterious flow that connects past, present, and future, now appears as a symbol of the cosmic consciousness that Augustine has revealed to her. Before you continue deeper into the labyrinth, Augustine says, "Let me leave you with one final insight. The greatest danger facing conscious beings is not death or suffering or even meaninglessness. The greatest danger is temporal fragmentation, the splitting of consciousness into disconnected moments, the inability to integrate memory, attention, and expectation into coherent patterns of growth and love." Sarah thinks of her own tendency to become so absorbed in abstract problems that she loses touch with the human relationships that give her life meaning, her habit of dwelling on past failures or future anxieties instead of attending fully to present possibilities. This is why your journey through the labyrinth is so important, Augustine continues. You are learning to heal the fragmentations in your own temporal consciousness, to integrate the different ways of understanding time that your species has discovered. But more than that, you are contributing to the universe's own healing, its own integration of the various aspects of temporal existence. As Augustine's presence begins to fade like the last light of sunset, Sarah feels a deep gratitude for the transformation in understanding she has experienced. The garden around her seems to pulse with life and meaning, every element connected to every other element through the flowing medium of temporal consciousness. Remember, Augustine's voice comes to her like an echo. Time is not the enemy of eternity, but its deepest expression. In learning to live fully in time, to remember with gratitude, attend with love, and expect with hope, you participate in eternal life that is the universe's deepest truth. Sarah stands alone in the garden now, but she does not feel lonely. She feels connected to the vast community of conscious beings who have wrestled with time's mystery, and beyond that, connected to the cosmic process itself as it develops toward ever greater capacity for love and understanding. The paths leading out of the Augustinian garden glow with new colors now, suggesting different modes of temporal investigation. Sarah understands that her journey is far from complete. Augustine has shown her the subjective, experiential dimension of time, the way consciousness creates temporal meaning through the integration of memory, attention, and expectation. But she senses that other great insights await her, other ways of understanding what it means to exist as a temporal being in an evolving universe. With renewed purpose and deepened understanding, Sarah chooses her next path and continues deeper into the labyrinth, carried with her Augustine's gift of temporal integration and his vision of time as the medium through which love becomes possible. Part 4. The Existential Crossroads. Being toward death, Sarah leaves the tranquil beauty of Augustine's garden behind, following a path that gradually darkens from golden warmth to something more austere and challenging. The comfortable certainty she had begun to build, Einstein's mathematical elegance, Augustine's spiritual integration, start to feel less solid as she walks deeper into a region of the labyrinth that seems to pulse with anxiety and possibility in equal measure. The path leads her to a crossroads unlike any junction she has ever encountered. 5 paths converge here, but they are not simple roads carved through landscape. Instead, they appear to be possibilities made manifest, shimmering pathways that seem to exist only as long as they are being contemplated, fading into uncertainty the moment attention shifts away from them. Above the crossroads, the sky has taken on a heavy gray of approaching storm, pregnant with potential but also threateningly dark. The air itself feels thick with unspoken questions. What if I had made different choices? What if I make the wrong choice now? What if there is no right choice? Sarah realizes that this is not just a physical location, but a psychological and existential space. The place where human beings confront the fundamental uncertainty and responsibility of existence. Standing at the center of the crossroads is a figure who seems to embody this atmosphere of anxious questioning. Martin Heidegger appears not as the elderly philosopher of popular memory, but as a man caught in the tension between profound insight and deep uncertainty. His eyes hold the penetrating intensity of someone who has looked directly into the abyss of human finitude and found there both terror and authentic possibility. He is dressed simply, practically, like someone who spends time in forests and mountains, but his bearing suggests the weight of ultimate questions. Dr. Chun, Heidegger says, his voice carrying the cadence of someone accustomed to careful thought and precise expression. Welcome to the place where all easy answers come to die. Here, in this crossroads, we encounter what I call the fundamental mood of anxiety. Not fear of any particular thing, but the deeper unease that comes from recognizing the groundless ground of human existence. Sarah feels the anxiety he describes washing over her like a tide. It is not the specific worry about her career or relationships that she knows from ordinary life, but something more elemental, a recognition that her very existence is suspended over an abyss of uncertainty, that every choice she makes shapes not only her future, but her understanding of what it means to be human. Professor Heidegger, she says, struggling to maintain her scientific composure against the weight of existential uncertainty. I've been learning about time from Einstein and Augustine, the physical structure of space-time and the consciousness that creates temporal meaning. But standing here, I feel like I'm missing something fundamental about what it means to exist in time. Heidegger nods approvingly, as if recognizing a student who has finally begun to ask the right questions. Precisely, both Einstein and Augustine, despite their profound insights, approach time as if it were an object that could be studied from the outside. Einstein examines the mathematical relationships that govern temporal processes. Augustine explores how consciousness integrates temporal experience. But they both miss the most fundamental truth. We do not have a relationship with time. We are temporal through and through. Our very being is temporal being. As he speaks, the crossroads around them begins to shift and change, the paths multiplying and branching like the neurons of some vast brain contemplating its own existence. Sarah realizes that she is not just observing this place. She is part of its structure, her own possibilities and choices contributing to the ever-changing geometry of the intersection. What you are experiencing here, Heidegger continues, is what I call Dacian. Being there, the specifically human mode of existence that is characterized by the fact that its own being is an issue for it. Unlike a rock, which simply is what it is, or even an animal, which follows its instincts, you exist in such a way that your own existence is constantly in question. You must choose what to be, how to live, what to value, and these choices are made without any guarantee that they are correct. Sarah feels the weight of this insight settling into her bones. Her scientific training has always provided her with methods for determining correct answers, objective truths that exist independent of her personal preferences or fears. But standing here at the crossroads, she realizes that the most important questions, how should I live? What gives my existence meaning? What do I owe to others and to the future? These questions have no objective answers waiting to be discovered. This is why anxiety is so central to human existence, Heidegger explains, his voice taking on the tone of someone who has lived through the implications of his own insights. Anxiety is not pathological. It is a fundamental attunement that reveals the truth of our condition. In anxiety, we realize that we've been thrown into existence without choosing it, that we must make choices without ultimate justification, and that all of our projects and relationships are shadowed by the certainty of death. The mention of death causes a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the crossroads. The paths around them seem to converge on a single point in the distance, not visible, but felt as an inevitable destination that gives shape and urgency to every choice. Sarah experiences what Heidegger calls being toward death, not morbid preoccupation with dying, but recognition that mortality is a horizon that makes all of her possibilities meaningful. But why is death so important? Sarah asks, even as she feels its presence transforming her understanding of the crossroads. Einstein showed me that from the perspective of space-time, all moments exist eternally. Augustine taught me that consciousness can transcend temporal limitations through memory and love. Why should the fact that my biological processes will eventually cease matter so much? Heidegger's eyes flash with the intensity of someone who has spent decades wrestling with exactly this question. Because it is only in facing our own finitude that we can live authentically. When we truly understand that our time is limited, that our opportunities are finite, that our choices have irreversible consequences, then we can no longer hide behind the comfortable illusions of everyday existence. As he speaks, Sarah sees around the crossroads what Heidegger calls the representations of all the ways human beings typically flee from authentic existence into the comfort of conformity. She sees herself as she has often been, absorbed in her work to avoid confronting deeper questions about meaning, following social expectations rather than choosing her own path, treating death as a distant abstraction rather than the fundamental reality that gives urgency to life. Most of the time, Heidegger continues, we live in what I call thrownness. We find ourselves in situations we did not choose, with backgrounds and capacities we did not select, facing possibilities we did not create. This thrownness can lead to despair, to the feeling that we are victims of circumstances beyond our control. But authentic existence begins when we recognize that even thrown beings can choose how to respond to their situations. The crossroad shifts again, and Sarah realizes that each path represents not just a destination, but a way of taking responsibility for her thrown existence. One path glows with the possibility of returning to her scientific work with deepened understanding, but also with the recognition that science alone cannot answer the questions that matter most. Another path suggests a life devoted to teaching, helping others navigate the same existential challenges she is encountering. A third path seems to lead toward forms of creative expression that could communicate truths too deep for purely rational discourse. But how do I choose? Sarah asks, feeling the weight of freedom that comes with authentic recognition of her own responsibility. Without objective criteria for what constitutes a good life, how can I know which path to take? This is the question that reveals the deepest truth about human temporality. Heidegger responds, you cannot choose based on preset criteria because your choice creates the criteria. Your decision about how to live is simultaneously a decision about what human life should be. You choose not just for yourself, but for humanity as a whole. Sarah feels vertigo at the implications of this insight. Every choice she makes about her career, her relationships, her values becomes a vote in the ongoing human conversation about what it means to live well. There is no escape into purely private decisions. Her life inevitably becomes a model that either inspires or discourages others in their own struggle for authenticity. This is why I speak of authentic existence as resoluteness, Heidegger continues. Not stubbornness or dogmatism, but the willingness to choose fully while acknowledging uncertainty, to commit yourself to possibilities while remaining open to revision, to live with the knowledge that you might be wrong, but that not choosing is itself a choice. As Sarah contemplates the paths before her, she begins to understand something crucial about the nature of temporal existence. The future is not simply a region of space-time that she will eventually reach, nor merely the object of her expectations and hopes. The future is a realm of her own possibilities, Not abstract potentials, but concrete opportunities for self-creation that exist only as long as she's alive to actualize them. And this brings us to perhaps the most important insight about human temporality. Heidegger says, his voice taking on the gravity of someone sharing his deepest understanding. Past, present, and future are not three separate temporal regions that you move through. There are three aspects of your being that must be integrated into authentic existence. The crossroads around them transforms into a space that makes visible this temporal integration. Sarah sees how her past exists not as fixed history, but as a thrown situation that provides the materials for her self-creation. Her present is not a knife-edge moment, but the space of decision where she takes up her past and projects toward her future. Her future is not predetermined destiny, but the open realm of possibilities that calls her beyond her current limitations. Your past becomes authentic when you own it fully, not just the successes and achievements, but the failures and limitations as well. You cannot change what has happened, but you can change how it functions in your ongoing self-creation. Your guilt, your missed opportunities, your moment of cowardice or cruelty, these can become sources of wisdom and compassion rather than excuses for despair. Sarah thinks of her own past, the relationships she has sacrificed for her career, the moments when she chose safety over authenticity, the times when she is hidden behind her expertise to avoid admitting uncertainty or need. She begins to see how these experiences, rather than disqualify her from authentic existence, could become the foundation for deeper understanding and more genuine relationships. Your present becomes authentic when you recognize it as the moment of choice, Heidegger continues. Not passive reception of predetermined events, but active engagement with the possibilities that your situation makes available. Every moment offers opportunities for more authentic or less authentic ways of being. You cannot avoid choosing, but you can choose more or less consciously. The crossroads pulses with this recognition, each path representing not just a direction, but a quality of engagement with existence. Sarah realizes that authenticity is not about finding the right path, but about choosing whichever path she chooses with full recognition of its implications and responsibilities. And your future becomes authentic when you understand it as your own most possibility, Heidegger concludes. Not wishful thinking or ambitious planning, but recognition of the unique opportunities for self-creation that belong specifically to your situation, your capacities, your historical moment. As he speaks these words, Sarah feels a fundamental shift in her relationship to time. Instead of experiencing herself as a victim of temporal flow, carried along by forces beyond her control from an unchangeable past toward an uncertain future, she begins to experience herself as a temporal agent, someone whose very existence consists in the ongoing integration of what has been, what is, and what could be. The anxiety that pervaded the crossroads begins to transform. It does not disappear. Sarah realizes that anxiety will always be part of authentic existence, the mood that reveals the groundlessness and responsibility of human freedom. But it becomes what Heidegger calls fundamental anxiety, not neurotic worry, but the clear-sighted recognition of the human condition that makes genuine choice possible. Before you continue your journey, Heidegger says, his presence beginning to fade like evening shadows. Remember this. Authenticity is not an achievement you can attain once and for all. It is a way of existing that must be renewed in each moment, a constant choosing to live consciously in the face of uncertainty, rather than fleeing into the comforting illusions of everyday existence. As Heidegger's figure dissolves into gathering dusk, Sarah stands alone at the crossroads, but she no longer feels lost. She understands now that the point is not to find a correct path, but to choose her path consciously, with full recognition of its implications and limitations. Whatever direction she takes, she will carry with her the insight she has gained about authentic temporal existence, the recognition that she is fundamentally a being who exists by projecting toward possibilities, that her mortality gives urgency and meaning to her choices, that her freedom comes with inescapable responsibility not just for herself, but for the human community of which she is part. The paths before her continue to shift and change, reflecting the dynamic nature of human possibility. But now Sarah sees this not as confusion, but as a natural condition of authentic existence, a life that remains open to revision and growth while taking full responsibility for its choices and their consequences. With a deep breath that acknowledges both the weight and the gift of human freedom, Sarah chooses her next path and continues deeper into the labyrinth. carry with her Heidegger's challenge to live authentically in full recognition of her own temporal finitude and creative responsibility. Part 5. The Quantum Chamber. Uncertainty and Possibility. Sarah walks away from the existential crossroads on a path that seems to crystallize beneath her feet with each step, as if her choice to follow it is what brings it into being. The philosophical weight of Heidegger's insights about authentic existence and being toward death continues to resonate through her consciousness, but gradually she becomes aware that she is entering a realm where even these profound truths will be challenged and transformed. The path leads her through a region of the labyrinth that defies conventional description. The walls appear to be made of substance that exists in constant flux between solid matter and pure energy, sometimes transparent as glass, sometimes opaque as metal, sometimes seeming to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Light behaves strangely here, not traveling in straight lines, but following probability curves that bend and branch like rivers delta into the sea of possibility. Ahead of her, Sarah sees what appears to be a vast chamber, but as she approaches, she realizes that chamber is an inadequate term for this space. It exists in a constant state of quantum superposition, simultaneously small enough to feel intimate and large enough to contain universes. The boundaries shift and breathe like living membranes, respond in observation in ways that remind her most advanced experiments with quantum field theory. As she crosses the threshold into this impossible space, Sarah feels her own existence beginning to behave quantum mechanically. She experiences a strange sensation of existing in multiple states at once. She is simultaneously the confident physicist who mastered quantum mechanics and the uncertain graduate student struggling with wave-particle duality, the woman who chose science over family, and the virgin who made different choices, the seeker of truth and the questioner of everything she thought she knew. At the center of the chamber stands a figure that embodies this quantum ambiguity. It is herself, but not quite herself. This other Sarah exists in the superposition of all the quantum states she might have collapsed into through different choices and observations. Sometimes she appears as a Sarah who remained in pure theoretical research, sometimes as the one who moved into experimental work, sometimes as versions who left physics entirely to pursue art or philosophy or family life. Welcome to the quantum chamber. This superposition, Sarah says, her voice harmonizes with itself in ways that should be impossible. Here, we confront the deepest challenge to everything Einstein, Augustine, and Heidegger taught you about the nature of time and existence. Sarah stares at her quantum self, feeling disoriented by the multiplication of possibilities. But this is impossible. Quantum effects only manifest at microscopic scales. Conscious observers like us should collapse the wave function, force reality into definite states. Should we? The quantum Sarah responds, and Sarah notices that with each word, new versions of herself seem to split off and recombine, creating a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of possibility. What if consciousness doesn't collapse the wave function? What if consciousness is the wave function? What if the entire universe exists in superposition, and what we call reality is just one branch of an infinitely complex probability tree? As if responding to these questions, the chamber around them begins to display the quantum mechanical foundations of reality in ways that transcend mathematical formalism. Sarah sees the fundamental particles that compose her body existing not as discrete entities, but as probability clouds, their positions and momenta linked by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in a dance of complementary indefiniteness. Look around you, quantum Sarah continues. What do you see? Sarah observes that the chamber is filled with versions of every choice she has ever made or might make, playing out simultaneously in overlapping probability streams. She sees herself accepting the job at CERN and declining it, marrying James and remaining single, having children and dedicate herself entirely to research, discovering the secret of time travel, and dying in obscurity without recognition. Every quantum measurement, every moment of observation, every decision splits the universe into multiple branches. Quantum Sarah explains. The many worlds interpretation suggests that all possibilities are equally real, that every potential outcome of every quantum event actually occurs in parallel realities. Sarah feels her understanding of time fragmenting and rebuilding itself. But if every possibility is realized, then what meaning do my choices have? Why should I struggle with authenticity and responsibility if every version of every choice is equally real somewhere in the quantum multiverse? The chamber pulses with this question, and Sarah realizes she is not just asking it. She is embodying it. Every doubt, every possibility, every potential response exists simultaneously in the quantum superposition of her consciousness. This is where the insights of your previous teachers become crucial. Quantum Sarah responds. Einstein showed you that time is relative, that simultaneity depends on reference frame. But quantum mechanics reveals something even stranger, that the very notion of definite events occurring at definite times breaks down at the fundamental level. The walls of the chamber transform into visual representations of quantum temporal phenomena. Sarah sees quantum particles existing in superposition of different temporal states, events that occur before their causes in some reference frames. Quantum entangled systems where changes appear to happen instantaneously across vast distances, seemingly violating the light speed limit that Einstein established as absolute. Augustine taught you that consciousness creates temporal experience through the integration of memory, attention, and expectation. Quantum Sarah continues. But what if consciousness itself exists in quantum superposition? What if your memories include events that happened in other branches of reality? What if your attention can encompass multiple simultaneous possibilities? What if your expectations can actually influence which quantum futures become actualized? Sarah experiences this possibility viscerally. Her memories begin to include not just what actually happened in her linear timeline, but shadow memories of paths not taken, choices not made, relationships not pursued. She remembers graduating with a degree in philosophy, spending years in Tibet studying meditation, become a mother at 25, die in a car accident that she somehow also survived. And Heidegger showed you that authentic existence requires embracing uncertainty, taking responsibility for choices made without ultimate foundation. Quantum Sarah says. But quantum mechanics reveals that uncertainty is not just a feature of human decision-making. It is built into the very structure of reality. The universe itself is constantly choosing among possibilities, and consciousness might be the mechanism through which these choices are made. As this insight settles into Sarah's awareness, she begins to understand that the quantum chamber is not just showing her multiple versions of herself. It is revealing the quantum nature of consciousness itself. Her thoughts, emotions, and choices exist in superposition until a moment of decision collapses them into definite form. But even then, other versions continue to exist in parallel branches of reality. But this raises a terrifying question, Sarah says, feeling the weight of infinite possibility pressing against her consciousness. If every choice creates multiple realities, if every moment branches into countless parallel worlds, then how can I ever know which version of myself is real? How can I take responsibility for my choices if I am simultaneously making every possible choice? The chamber responds to her anxiety by manifesting what appears to be the wave function of her entire existence, a multidimensional probability field that encompasses every possible path her life might take. The mathematical beauty of the structure is breathtaking, but also overwhelming in its complexity and scope. This is where you must integrate everything you have learned, Quantum Sarah says. And now Sarah notices that her quantum double is becoming more coherent, the multiple superposed states beginning to align in response to focused attention. Einstein's relativity, Augustine's temporal consciousness, Heidegger's authentic existence. They are all aspects of a deeper truth about the quantum nature of temporal reality. As she speaks, the chamber begins to demonstrate this integration. Sarah sees how the relativistic structure of space-time provides a framework within which quantum possibilities unfold. She observes how consciousness, through the Augustinian integration of memory, attention, and expectation, selects which quantum branches to actualize from the infinite field of possibilities. She witnesses how authentic existence, in Heidegger's sense, involves taking responsibility not just for the choices made in this branch of reality, but for the entire quantum field of possibility that surrounds every decision. Your consciousness is not separate from the universe's quantum processes, Quantum Sarah explains. It is the mechanism through which the universe observes and chooses among its own possibilities. Every moment of authentic attention, every genuine choice, every act of love or creativity sends ripples through the quantum field, influencing which futures become actualized. Sarah feels a profound shift in her understanding of responsibility and meaning. Instead of being paralyzed by the thought of infinite parallel selves making every possible choice, she begins to see how her conscious decisions in this branch of reality contribute to the overall evolution of the quantum multiverse. Her authenticity matters not just for this version of herself, but for the entire field of possibility of which she is part. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics, Quantum Sarah continues, is not just a technical issue about when wave functions collapse. It is the deepest question about the nature of reality. How does the indefinite become definite? How do possibilities become actualities? The answer is consciousness, not as passive observer, but as active participant in the universe's ongoing self-creation. As this understanding deepens, Sarah begins to see the quantum chamber not as a place of confusion and uncertainty, but as a foundational level reality where all possibilities exist in potential, waiting for consciousness to actualize them to the act of observation and choice. The multiplicity of quantum states is not chaos, but infinite creativity, the universe's way of exploring every possible path of development. But there is still something missing, Sarah says, even as she marvels at the quantum revelation surrounding her. If consciousness select among quantum possibilities, what guides these selections? What prevents the universe from collapsing into randomness or determinism? There must be some principle that shapes how possibilities become actualities. Quantum Sarah smiles, and in that smile, Sarah sees reflections of all the wisdom she has encountered in the Labyrinth. Now you ask the question that will lead you deeper still. The universe's quantum choices are not random, but they are also not predetermined. They are guided by what we might call the universe's aesthetic sense, its tendency to actualize possibilities that are more beautiful, more complex, more conducive to the emergence of consciousness and love. The chamber transforms around them, showing the cosmic history as a quantum process guided by aesthetic principles. Sarah sees how the universe's early quantum choices led to the formation of stable atoms rather than chaos, how subsequent choices favored the development of stars and planets, and eventually life, how the emergence of consciousness represents a universe developing capacity to make choices based on meaning and value rather than mere probability. Your journey through the labyrinth is itself a quantum process, Quantum Sarah explains. Each insight, each transformation of understanding, each moment of authentic choice contributes to the universe's ongoing aesthetic evolution. You are not just learning about time, you are participating in time's own self-discovery. As the implications of this revelation settle into her consciousness, Sarah feels herself becoming more coherent, more integrated. The superposition of possibilities that characterizes the quantum realm does not disappear, but begins to organize itself around her growing understanding of her role as a conscious participant in cosmic evolution. The quantum chamber teaches us that uncertainty is not the enemy of meaning, but its source, Quantum Sarah says, her multiple states now harmonizing into a complex but unified song. In a completely determined universe, consciousness would be irrelevant. In a completely random universe, consciousness would be powerless. But in a quantum universe, consciousness becomes a creative principle through which possibility becomes actuality, through which the future is born from a marriage of what has been and what might be. Sarah realizes that she is ready to leave the quantum chamber, but not because she has solved its mysteries. Rather, she has learned to embrace the uncertainty that lies at the heart of reality, to see it not as a problem to be eliminated, but as a very condition that makes creativity, growth, and authentic existence possible. As she prepares to continue her journey, the quantum versions of herself begin to converge, not into a single definite state, but into what she understands as a coherent superposition, a state that encompasses multiple possibilities while maintaining sufficient definition to act consciously and responsibly in the world. Remember, Quantum Sarah says as her figure begins to fade into probability mist, every moment offers infinite possibilities, but consciousness gives it the power to actualize the possibilities that serve the universe's deepest purposes. You are not just a passive observer of quantum processes. You are quantum processes becoming conscious of themselves. Sarah stands alone in the quantum chamber now, but she is no longer troubled by the multiplicity of possibilities surrounding her. She understands that she carries within her consciousness the quantum nature of reality itself, the capacity to exist in superposition while making definite choices, to embrace uncertainty while taking responsibility, to participate in the universe's ongoing creative evolution through every act of authentic attention and love. The paths leading out of the chamber no longer appear as fixed corridors, but as probability streams, each one representing a different way of integrating quantum insights with the wisdom she has already gained. Sarah chooses not just a path, but a way of choosing, consciously, authentically, with full recognition of the creative power that consciousness wields in the quantum universe. As she continues deeper into the labyrinth, she carries with her the understanding that time itself has a quantum nature, existing as a field of possibilities that consciousness helps actualize through every moment of genuine engagement with reality. Part 6. The Eternal Return. Cyclical versus linear time. Sarah emerges from a quantum chamber with her consciousness fundamentally altered, carrying within herself the understanding that reality exists in constant superposition of possibilities, that consciousness plays an active role in actualizing potential futures, and that uncertainty is not a flaw in the cosmic design, but its most creative feature. Yet as she walks along a path that seems to spiral rather than proceed in straight lines, she senses that another fundamental challenge to her understanding awaits. The pathway beneath her feet begins to curve more dramatically, rising and falling in patterns that create the sensation of walking along the edge of some vast spiral. The walls around her show not the static surfaces she has grown accustomed to, but moving images that seem to repeat in cycles. The same faces, the same conversations, the same moments of joy and sorrow playing out again and again with subtle variations. Gradually, Sarah realizes that the path is not merely curved, but actually circular, that she is ascending along the outer edge of a massive spiral staircase that seems to climb toward infinity, while somehow always returning to familiar territory. Each level of the spiral brings her to places that feel eerily similar to locations she has already visited, yet change in ways that suggest the passage of vast amounts of time. At what appears to be a resting platform on the Great Spiral, Sarah encounters a figure who embodies this strange temporal recursion. It is Friedrich Nietzsche, but not the Nietzsche of biographical history. This is Nietzsche as eternal principle, the philosopher who discovered the terrifying and liberating truth of eternal recurrence. He appears to exist at all ages simultaneously. Sometimes a young philologist fascinated by ancient Greek tragedy, sometimes a middle-aged wanderer proclaiming the death of God, sometimes the prophet of the Übermensch, and sometimes a broken man who spent his final years in madness. Welcome, seeker of temporal truth. Nietzsche says, his voice carrying both the exuberance of someone who has glimpsed ultimate reality and the weight of someone who has paid the full price for such knowledge. You have learned much about the nature of time, its relativity, its connection to consciousness, its existential dimensions, its quantum foundations. But now you must confront the most challenging question of all. What if time is not linear progression but eternal repetition? Sarah feels a chill of recognition mixed with dread. You're talking about eternal recurrence, the idea that every moment, every choice, every experience will repeat exactly as it has been infinite times throughout eternity. Precisely, Nietzsche exclaims, his eyes blazing with the intensity of someone who has stared directly into the abyss of infinite time. But do not mistake this for mere philosophical speculation. Eternal recurrence is not a theory to be debated. It is the ultimate test of how you value your existence. If you knew that your life, exactly as you've lived it, would repeat forever without the slightest variation, would you curse your fate or bless your existence? As he speaks, the spiral staircase around them transforms into a vast mandala of repeating patterns. Sarah sees her own life playing out in infinite variations. Every conversation with James repeated endlessly. Every moment of doubt in the laboratory, cycling to eternity. Every choice she has made in the labyrinth, destined to be made again and again throughout infinite time. But this seems to contradict everything I've learned, Sarah protests, feeling her hard-won insights about authentic choice and creative possibility threatened by the vision of endless repetition. Heidegger taught me that my choices matter because they create meaning through temporal finitude. The quantum chamber revealed that consciousness actualizes new possibilities from infinite potential. How can these truths coexist with eternal recurrence? Nietzsche laughs, and his laughter contains both joy and desperation. You are asking the right question. This is the crisis that eternal recurrence brings to all comfortable philosophies of meaning and progress. If everything repeats exactly, then what value does novelty have? If every choice has been made infinite times before, what significance does individual responsibility carry? The mandala around them shifts, showing not just Sarah's life, but the entire history of the cosmos repeating in endless cycles. She sees the birth and death of stars, the emergence and extinction of civilizations, the rise and fall of love affairs and philosophical systems, all cycling through identical patterns across infinite time. But here is what most people miss about eternal recurrence. Nietzsche continues, his form now flickering between his various historical selves. It is not a cosmological doctrine about the actual structure of time. It is a psychological test, an existential challenge, the ultimate criterion for authentic existence. The question is not whether eternal recurrence is literally true, but whether you can live as if it were true. Sarah struggles to grasp the implications. You mean as a thought experiment? A way of testing whether I truly affirm my existence? More than a thought experiment. It is the ultimate spiritual exercise. When you truly understand eternal recurrence, when you feel in your bones that this moment, this choice, this very conversation will repeat endlessly throughout eternity, then you discover whether you are living a life worthy of infinite repetition. As Nietzsche speaks, Sarah begins to experience the full weight of eternal recurrence. Every casual word she has spoken, every moment of pettiness or selfishness, every failure to live up to her highest possibilities, all of it destined for endless repetition. But also every moment of love, every breakthrough in understanding, every act of courage or compassion, equally eternal. This is why I call eternal recurrence the heaviest weight, Nietzsche explains, his voice taking on the gravity of ultimate seriousness. It strips away all comfortable illusions about progress, about redemption, about the possibility that suffering will eventually be justified by future happiness. Under the aspect of eternity, every moment must justify itself, must be valuable enough to desire its infinite return. The spiral staircase reveals its deeper structure now. Not endless linear repetition, but what appears to be a spiral of spirals, patterns within patterns, cycles that return to similar but never identical points. Sarah realizes that even within the framework of eternal recurrence, there is room for variation, for the subtle differences that accumulate across cycles to create new patterns of meaning. But wait, Sarah says, her scientific mind grappling with the paradoxes. If eternal recurrence includes the quantum nature of reality, then each cycle would have to include all possible quantum branches, all potential outcomes. The recurrence would not be of identical events, but of identical probabilities playing out across infinite possibilities. Nietzsche's eyes light up with delight. Now you begin to see. The eternal return is not mechanical repetition, but creative recursion. Each cycle returns to the same possibilities, but the actualization of those possibilities can vary. This is why authentic existence matters even within eternal recurrence. Your choices don't just affect this cycle, they influence the patterns that repeat across all cycles. As this insight deepens, Sarah begins to understand how eternal recurrence relates to everything she has learned in the Labyrinth. Einstein's block universe, where all moments exist eternally, becomes not a static structure, but a dynamic pattern that repeats and varies across cycles. Augustine's integration of memory, attention, and expectation becomes a mechanism through which consciousness participates in the creative aspects of recurrence. Heidegger's authentic existence becomes a way of living that makes each cycle a genuine repetition, rather than mere mechanical reproduction. The quantum chamber taught you that consciousness actualizes possibilities from infinite potential. Nietzsche continues. Eternal recurrence reveals that this actualization process itself occurs, not as identical repetition, but as similar patterns of choice playing out across infinite time. Your consciousness is not just participating in cosmic evolution, it is participating in cosmic recursion, the universe's way of exploring its own possibilities through endless creative cycles. Sarah feels a fundamental shift in her relationship to time and meaning. The anxiety she initially felt about eternal recurrence begins to transform into something like exhilaration. If her life is worthy of infinite repetition, if her choices contribute to patterns that enhance rather than diminish the universe's creative potential, then every moment becomes an opportunity for eternal affirmation. But this raises a question of memory, Sarah says, exploring the implications. If everything recurs, do we maintain memory across cycles? Are we conscious of the repetition, or do we experience each cycle as completely fresh? Nietzsche's expression becomes deeply contemplative, as if this question touches upon the most mysterious aspects of eternal recurrence. This is where the doctrine becomes most profound and most terrifying. In one sense, each cycle must be experienced as completely new. Otherwise, it would not be genuine recurrence, but merely the mechanical replay of recorded events. Yet in another sense, there must be some form of transcyclical memory, some way in which the patterns learn and evolve across iterations. As he speaks, the spiral staircase reveals another level of its structure. Sarah sees that what she had taken for repetition is actually recurrence with difference. Each cycle returns to similar patterns, but with accumulated wisdom, with subtle variations that reflect a learning that has occurred across previous iterations. Consider your journey through this labyrinth, Nietzsche suggests. Each insight you gain, each transformation of understanding you undergo, becomes part of the pattern that will recur. But the quality of that recurrence depends on how deeply you integrate the wisdom, how authentically you live the truth you have discovered. Sarah realizes that she is experiencing something like transcyclical memory right now. The lessons from Einstein, Augustine, Heidegger, and the quantum chamber don't feel like new discoveries, but like remembrances of truths she has always known but temporarily forgotten. Each level of the labyrinth reveals not foreign knowledge, but deeper layers of her own being. This is why eternal recurrence is ultimately about a more fatty love of fate, Nietzsche explains, his voice taking on the tender intensity of someone who has learned to embrace the totality of existence. To truly understand eternal recurrence is to reach a point where you can say yes to your entire existence, not despite its suffering and limitations, but because of the unique pattern of meaning that emerges from the whole. The mandala around them shifts to show not just individual lives, but the vast patterns of cosmic evolution recurring across cycles. Sarah sees how each iteration of the universe explores slightly different possibilities, how consciousness evolves across cycles to become more capable of understanding and affirming the total pattern. But if that's true, Sarah says, working through the implications, then eternal recurrence isn't really about exact repetition. It's about the evolution of consciousness toward perfect affirmation of existence. Each cycle brings a possibility of deeper understanding, greater love, more complete integration of all aspects of experience. Precisely, Nietzsche exclaims, and for a moment his various temporal selves align into a unified expression of joy. Eternal recurrence is not a prison, but a school, not a curse, but the ultimate blessing. It gives consciousness infinite opportunities to learn how to say yes to existence, how to find meaning and beauty even in suffering, how to become what I call the Übermensch, the being who has learned to create values rather than merely inherit them. Sarah begins to understand how this connects to everything she has learned about time. The linear time of progress and development that Western civilization has emphasized is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The cyclical time of many ancient traditions, with their emphasis on seasonal rhythms and recurring patterns, captures another essential truth about temporal existence. Eternal recurrence reconciles these perspectives by showing how progress occurs through repetition, how novelty emerges from recursion. The physicist in you wants to know whether eternal recurrence is literally true, Nietzsche observes, reading her thoughts. But the deeper question is whether you can live as if it were true. Can you make choices, form relationships, pursue goals with such integrity that you would willingly repeat them forever? Can you transform your relationship to suffering so that even your worst experiences become part of a pattern you would choose to repeat? As Sarah contemplates these questions, she feels her entire understanding of meaning and value undergoing transformation. The utilitarian calculus that judges actions by their consequences becomes inadequate when every action will be repeated infinitely. The existential emphasis on authentic choice takes on new dimensions when every choice becomes eternal. Even the quantum understanding of consciousness actualizing possibilities gains new significance when the actualization process itself recurs across cycles. This is why I proclaim the death of God, Nietzsche continues, his voice carrying both the pain and liberation of ultimate philosophical honesty. Not because I wanted to eliminate the sacred, but because I realize that we must become capable of sacred existence without external justification. Eternal recurrence strips away all cosmic guarantees, all promises of eventual redemption, and asks whether existence can be its own justification. Sarah feels the full weight of this challenge. Without the promise of progress towards some ultimate goal, without the hope that suffering will eventually be redeemed by greater happiness, She must find ways to affirm existence as it is, including its darkness and uncertainty. But here's what I discovered. Nietzsche says his expression softening into something like tenderness. When you truly learn to love your fate, when you achieve genuine morphati, you discover that existence is infinitely richer and more beautiful than any external justification could make it. The very temporality that seems to threaten meaning becomes a condition that makes meaning possible. The spiral staircase around them transforms into something like a vast musical score, with recurring themes and variations that create patterns of meaning across multiple scales of time. Sarah sees how her individual life contributes to larger cultural patterns, how those cultural patterns participate in species-wide evolution, how species evolution contributes to cosmic development, and how all of these levels of pattern interact across the cycles of eternal recurrence. Every level of existence participates in eternal recurrence, Nietzsche explains. The quantum processes that the previous chamber revealed to you, the biological patterns that shape life, the psychological structures that create consciousness, the cultural forms that give meaning to human existence, all of these recur in cycles that allow for both repetition and variation. Sarah begins to understand that eternal recurrence is not a doctrine about the literal structure of time, but a recognition of the recursive nature of existence at every level. Patterns repeat, but never exactly. There's always space for novelty, for creativity, for the emergence of unprecedented possibilities within familiar structures. This is why your journey through the labyrinth has led you to this point. Nietzsche says, his form beginning to dissolve back into the cycling patterns of the mandala. You needed to understand time's physical structure, its relationship to consciousness, its existential dimensions, and its quantum foundations before you could grasp eternal recurrence. Now you see that time is not just linear development or cyclical repetition, but recursive creativity, the universe's way of exploring its own possibilities through patterns that repeat with infinite variation. As Nietzsche's presence fades, Sarah finds herself alone on the spiral staircase, but she no longer experiences solitude as loneliness. She understands that she is part of vast patterns of existence that connect her to every other conscious being across all cycles of time. Her individual choices and insights contribute to the universe's ongoing learning process, its gradual development toward more perfect forms of self-affirmation. The spiral reveals its final secret. It is not just a staircase, but a double helix, like the DNA that carries genetic information across generations. Sarah realizes that eternal recurrence functions like cosmic DNA, preserving essential patterns while allowing for creative variation, ensuring both stability and evolution across the cycles of cosmic time. I understand now, Sarah says to the cycling patterns around her. Eternal recurrence doesn't negate the significance of individual choice. It makes every choice eternally significant. It doesn't eliminate the possibility of progress. It makes progress recursive, ensuring that whatever wisdom consciousness achieves is never permanently lost. The paths leading away from the spiral platform glow with new significance. Sarah understands that each choice she makes from this point forward will be made with the knowledge of eternal recurrence, with the understanding that she is participating in patterns that transcend her individual existence, while depending on the quality of her individual participation. She chooses her next path not just based on where it leads in this cycle, but on the eternal pattern it contributes to across all cycles. Her choice carries the weight of eternity, but also the joy of knowing that authentic existence, once achieved, becomes part of the universe's permanent treasury of possibilities. As she continues deeper into the labyrinth, Sarah carries with her Nietzsche's gift of eternal recurrence, the understanding that time is not just linear progression or quantum superposition or existential finitude, but recursive creativity, the universe's way of learning to love itself through infinite cycles of experience and affirmation. The very repetition that initially seemed to threaten meaning has become the guarantee that meaning, once discovered, becomes eternal. Part 7. The Synthesis Chamber. Reconciling the irreconcilable. Sarah descends from the spiral staircase of eternal recurrence, carrying within her consciousness a symphony of seemingly contradictory truths about the nature of time. Einstein's relativistic space-time, Augustine's threefold present of memory, attention, expectation, Heidegger's existential temporality of thrown projection toward death, the quantum superposition of all possibilities, and Nietzsche's eternal recurrence of creative patterns. Each insight feels absolutely true and essential, yet together they seem to pull her understanding in irreconcilable directions. The path leads her into what appears to be the heart of the labyrinth itself, a vast chamber that defies architectural logic, simultaneously intimate and infinite, ancient and futuristic, filled with harmonious light, yet containing depths of mysterious shadow. The walls, floor, and ceiling seem to be constructed from crystallized time itself, transparent surfaces that reveal the flowing interaction of past, present, and future in patterns too complex for linear thought to grasp. At the center of this impossible space stands a circular platform where three figures await her arrival. Einstein sits at one point of the triangle they form, his wild hair seeming to crackle with the energy of cosmic equations. Augustine occupies another position, his robes flowing like temporal currents around his contemplative form. Heidegger completes the triangle, his presence radiating the weight of existential questioning and authentic choice. But something unprecedented is happening in this space. Unlike her previous encounters with these great minds, where she met each teacher individually, here the three figures exist in dynamic relationship with each other, their insights weaving together in a conversation that has apparently been ongoing across centuries and dimensions. "Welcome, Sarah," Einstein says, his voice carrying both the playful curiosity that drove his discoveries and profound seriousness that came with understanding cosmic responsibility. "We have been waiting for you to arrive at this place where all perspectives must be reconciled." "Indeed," Augustine adds, his tone warm with the joy of someone who has learned to embrace paradox as revelation rather than contradiction. "You have gathered insights that seem to conflict, but in truth they are like different faces of a jewel that can only be appreciated when viewed from multiple angles simultaneously." "The question," Heidegger interjects, his voice carrying its characteristic depth and careful precision, "is whether you can hold these truths together without reducing one to another, without losing the essential insight that each brings to the mystery of temporal existence." Sarah steps onto the platform, and immediately she feels the three perspectives beginning to resonate within her consciousness in new ways. Instead of competing for dominance, they start to reveal their deep interconnections, the ways in which each truth requires and enriches the others. "Professor Einstein," Sarah begins, "your relativity showed me that time is not absolute but depends on reference frame and gravitational field. But how does this physical truth relate to Augustine's insight that consciousness creates temporal meaning through memory, attention, and expectation?" Einstein's eyes twinkle with the delight of a teacher whose student is asking precisely the right questions. "Consider this, my dear colleague. My equations describe a geometry of space-time, but they cannot tell us why any particular observer exists to experience that geometry. Augustine's insight reveals that consciousness is not just embedded in space-time. Consciousness is what transforms the abstract mathematical structure of space-time into lived temporal experience." Augustine nods in agreement. "And Einstein's discoveries show that my threefold present is not just a psychological phenomenon, but reflects the actual structure of reality. When I integrate memory of the past, attention to the present, and expectation of the future, I am participating in the way the universe itself relates different temporal regions through the medium of consciousness." As they speak, the crystalline walls of the chamber begin to display visual representations of the synthesis. Sarah sees space-time geometry becoming meaningful through the presence of conscious observers, while simultaneously witnessing how the structure of consciousness reflects and participates in the cosmic patterns Einstein discovered. But what about Heidegger's insight that authentic existence requires embracing finitude and mortality? Sarah asks, how does being toward death relate to the eternal patterns that physics reveals? Heidegger leans forward, his expression intense with the weight of existential truth. "My analysis of temporality revealed that human beings exist as thrown projection toward possibilities, always reaching beyond their current state, while remaining grounded in their factical situation. But what I discovered is that this existential structure mirrors the way the universe itself exists, as a cosmic process that projects toward new possibilities while remaining grounded in the achievements of its past." Einstein gestures to the displays around them, which now show cosmic evolution as a process of existential unfolding. The universe is thrown into existence just as individual humans are thrown into their particular situations. And like authentic human existence, cosmic evolution requires choosing among possibilities without ultimate guarantee of success. The difference, Augustine adds, is that individual consciousness participates in a larger temporal pattern that transcends personal mortality. Through memory, we preserve the achievements of the past. Through attention, we engage with present possibilities. Through expectation, we reach toward futures that extend beyond our individual lifespans. Sarah begins to see how the three perspectives form a coherent whole. So, individual consciousness is how the universe becomes aware of its own temporal nature, but that awareness is embedded in larger patterns that transcend individual existence while depending on individual participation. Precisely, all three figures say simultaneously, their voices harmonizing in a way that suggests deep agreement across their apparent philosophical differences. But Sarah realizes that the quantum insights and eternal recurrence have not yet been integrated into this synthesis. What about the quantum nature of reality? How do we reconcile consciousness as observer and actualize their possibilities with these patterns of temporal meaning? The chamber responds to her question by revealing another level of its structure. Sarah sees that the crystalline walls are not static, but exist in constant quantum superposition, displaying multiple possible configurations simultaneously until focused observation collapses them into definite form. The quantum realm shows us that consciousness is not just embedded in time. Consciousness participates in time's creation. Einstein explains, his understanding now encompassing developments that occurred after his historical death. Every moment of observation, every choice about what to tend to, contributes to actualizing specific possibilities from the infinite field of quantum potential. Augustine's eyes shine with recognition. This means that my threefold present is not just how consciousness experiences time, but how consciousness participates in time's emergence. Through memory, I preserve certain quantum possibilities rather than others. Through attention, I collapse wave functions into definite experiences. Through expectation, I influence which futures become available for actualization. Heidegger nods thoughtfully. An authentic existence takes on cosmic significance because our choices about how to live influence which possibilities the universe actualizes. Being toward death gives urgency to our participation in cosmic becoming because our window of influence is finite, but the effects of our choices ripple through the quantum field indefinitely. Sarah feels the pieces clicking together with an almost audible resonance. So consciousness is not just observing a predetermined reality or creating reality out of nothing. Consciousness is participating in reality's ongoing self-creation through the actualization of possibilities that serve larger patterns of meaning and beauty. Now you begin to understand, Einstein says with satisfaction, why I spent my later years searching for a unified field theory. I sense that all the fundamental forces and phenomena of physics must be aspects of a single underlying reality. What I did not fully grasp was that consciousness itself is part of this unified field, not separate from physical processes, but the mechanism through which physical processes become meaningful. The chamber transformed around them, displaying what appears to be a vast web of interconnection linking consciousness, quantum processes, space-time geometry, and temporal meaning into a single dynamic system. Sarah sees how her individual awareness participates in patterns that extend from quantum scales to cosmic scales, from momentary decisions to eternal recurrence. But where does eternal recurrence fit into the synthesis? Sarah asks, how do we reconcile Nietzsche's insight about cyclical return with the linear development and quantum creativity you're describing? The three figures exchange glances, and Sarah senses that she has touched upon the deepest mystery of all. Augustine speaks first, his voice carrying the weight of ultimate revelation. Eternal recurrence is not opposed to development and creativity. It is their ultimate ground. The patterns that consciousness helps actualize through quantum choices are the very patterns that recur across cosmic cycles. But each recurrence is also an opportunity for deeper understanding, more complete integration, more perfect synthesis of all temporal dimensions. Heidegger adds, authentic existence takes on eternal significance because the quality of our choices influences not just this cycle of cosmic development, but all cycles. When we live authentically, we contribute to patterns worthy of infinite repetition. When we live inauthentically, we contribute to patterns that diminish the universe's capacity for meaning and beauty. Einstein's contribution synthesizes both insights. The mathematics of eternal recurrence will have to include all quantum possibilities, all relativistic reference frames, all conscious perspectives. What recurs is not mechanical repetition, but creative exploration. The universe investigating its own possibilities through patterns that maintain identity while allowing for infinite variation. As the three teachers speak, Sarah feels her consciousness expanding to encompass this ultimate synthesis. She sees how time is simultaneously the relativistic geometry described by physics, the meaningful integration achieved by consciousness, the finite horizon that gives urgency to existence, the quantum field of actualized possibilities, the eternal pattern that preserves and develops achieved wisdom. The labyrinth itself, Sarah realizes aloud, is a representation of this unified understanding. Each path I've taken, each teacher I've encountered, each insight I've gained, they're all aspects of time's own self-exploration through consciousness. The three figures begin to fade, but not disappear entirely. Instead, they seem to become part of the chamber itself, their insights crystallized into the very structure of the space. Sarah understands that she has internalized their teachings so completely that she no longer needs their separate presence. Their wisdom has become part of her own consciousness. Before you continue to the final stages of your journey, Einstein's voice echoes through the chamber. Remember that this synthesis is not the end of understanding, but a new beginning. You now carry within yourself a unified vision of time that encompasses its physical, psychological, existential, and spiritual dimensions. Use this understanding wisely, Augustine's voice adds. You have learned not just about time, but about your role as a conscious participant in cosmic evolution. Your choices matter not just for your individual existence, but for the universe's ongoing self-development. And live authentically, Heidegger's voice concludes, knowing that your authentic existence contributes to patterns worthy of eternal recurrence, while your inauthentic choices diminish the cosmic store of meaning and beauty. Sarah stands alone in the synthesis chamber now, but she is no longer the same person who entered the labyrinth. She has become a living integration of temporal wisdom, someone who understands viscerally that consciousness and cosmos are not separate entities, but aspects of a single reality exploring its own nature through the medium of time. The chamber reveals new pathways leading deeper into the labyrinth, but Sarah understands that these final stages will not bring new information, but rather opportunities to integrate and embody the wisdom she has already gained. The real test lies not in understanding the synthesis intellectually, but in living it authentically, allowing to transform how she relates to every moment of her existence. She chooses her next path with the confidence of someone who has learned to navigate by internal compass rather than external signposts, ready for whatever challenges and revelations await in the deeper reaches of time's labyrinth. Part 8. The Temporal Mirror. Self-knowledge through time. Sarah emerges from the synthesis chamber transformed, carrying within her consciousness a unified understanding of time that encompasses its physical, psychological, existential, quantum, and eternal dimensions. Yet as she walks along a corridor that seems to pulse with her own heartbeat, she senses that intellectual synthesis, however profound, is not the end of her journey. The labyrinth has one more challenge to offer, not the acquisition of new knowledge, but the deepest form of self-recognition. The corridor opens into a hall unlike any space she has previously encountered. It is filled with mirrors, but these are not ordinary reflecting surfaces. Each mirror shows not just her current appearance, but different aspects of her relationship with time itself. As she approaches the first mirror, she sees herself as a child, but the reflection captures not just her youthful appearance, but her childlike relationship to temporality, the way she experienced each day as eternity, how summer vacations felt infinite, how time seemed to move differently during periods of boredom versus excitement. In the next mirror, she sees herself as a teenager grappling with her first serious thoughts about mortality, the way her grandmother's death introduced her to reality of temporal finitude. The reflection shows not just her external adolescent awkwardness, but the internal struggle to understand how consciousness could emerge from and return to nothingness, how meaning could exist in a universe where all individual existence is temporary. Each mirror she passes reveals another layer of her evolving relationship with time. She sees herself as an undergraduate student discovering Einstein's theories and feeling her entire worldview shifted by the realization that time is not the universal constant she had assumed. She observes her graduate student years, wrestling with quantum mechanics and the measurement problem, beginning to suspect that consciousness plays a more fundamental role in physical reality than classical physics acknowledged. But as Sarah moves deeper into the Hall of Mirrors, the reflections become more complex and challenging. She sees versions of herself that never pursued physics. The Sarah who became a philosopher, spending decades wrestling with temporal paradoxes through pure thought. The Sarah who became an artist, exploring time through music and visual representation. The Sarah who chose family life, experiencing time to the rhythms of child-rearing and domestic seasons. These aren't just alternative possibilities, Sarah realizes aloud. They're aspects of my actual relationship with time that I've suppressed or ignored in favor of my scientific identity. As if responding to her recognition, the mirrors begin to show deeper layers of temporal self-awareness. She sees the ways her scientific pursuit has been driven not just by intellectual curiosity, but by a deep anxiety about temporal finitude, a desperate need to understand time in order to somehow transcend or control it. She observes how her dedication to abstract theoretical work has sometimes been a form of escape from the messy, emotional, unpredictable aspects of lived temporal experience. One particularly challenging mirror shows her relationship with James, but not as a simple chronicle of shared experiences. Instead, it reveals the temporal dimensions of human intimacy, how love involves the integration of two different personal timelines, how genuine relationship requires synchronizing different rhythms of attention and expectation, how the deepest connections happen when two consciousnesses temporarily merge their distinct ways of integrating memory, attention, and hope. Sarah sees how her scientific ambitions have sometimes prevented her from fully engaging in these temporal dimensions of relationship. She observes moments when she was physically present but temporally absent, her attention scattered between past research and future possibilities, rather than focus on the shared present moment that intimacy requires. "I've been studying time," she says to her reflection, "but I haven't been fully living in time." The mirrors around her shift and multiply, creating a kaleidoscopic effect that shows how her individual temporal consciousness connects to larger patterns. She sees her personal timeline interwoven with family history, how her grandmother's stories about life during wartime created bridges between different historical periods, how her parents' immigrant experience involved complex negotiations between the temporal rhythms of their original culture and their adopted homeland. Beyond family patterns, the mirrors reveal how her individual relationship with time participates in larger cultural and species-wide developments. She sees how her generation's relationship to technology has created new forms of temporal experience. The acceleration of communication, the ability to access information from any historical period instantly, the way social media creates strange overlaps between past, present, and future experience. One mirror shows her how her scientific work participates in humanity's evolving understanding of temporal existence. She sees a historical development of time consciousness, from ancient mythological conceptions through medieval theological frameworks to modern scientific and philosophical insights. She realizes that her individual quest to understand time is part of a species-wide process of temporal self-awareness that has been developing for millennia. But the most challenging mirror is one that shows her potential futures, not as fixed destinies, but as live possibilities that depend on how she integrates and embodies the wisdom she has gained in the Labyrinth. She sees a version of herself who returns to her laboratory transformed, whose research becomes infused with the deeper insights about consciousness and meaning she has discovered. She observes a Sarah who learns to balance scientific rigor with genuine engagement in the temporal dimensions of relationship and community. She also sees less attractive possibilities, versions of herself who treat the Labyrinth experience as merely another intellectual achievement, who return to old patterns of using abstract knowledge as escape from authentic temporal existence. She witnesses the Sarah who becomes so overwhelmed by the complexity of temporal truth that she retreats into cynicism or despair. The choice between these possibilities, Sarah realizes, is not just about my personal future. It's about how consciousness itself evolves the capacity to understand and integrate temporal existence. As this insight deepens, the mirrors begin to reveal the most profound layer of temporal self-knowledge. Sarah sees that her individual consciousness is not separate from the cosmic processes she has been studying. It is how those processes become aware of themselves. Her personal quest to understand time is a universe developing its own temporal self-consciousness through the medium of human inquiry. The mirrors show her how every moment of genuine attention, every authentic choice, Every act of love or creativity sends ripples through the fabric of space-time, influencing which possibilities become actualized not just in her personal timeline, but in the larger patterns of cosmic development. She sees how her consciousness participates in what Augustine called the universe's own integration of memory, attention, and expectation. But with this recognition comes a deeper understanding of responsibility. If her consciousness is a focal point through which the universe develops self-awareness, then the quality of her attention, the authenticity of her choices, the depth of her integration of temporal wisdom affects not just her individual existence, but the cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. One mirror shows her the weight of this responsibility in stark terms. She sees how moments of inauthentic existence, times when she chose convenience over truth or comfort over growth, contribute to patterns that diminish rather than enhance the universe's capacity for meaning and beauty. But she also sees how moments of genuine authenticity, choices made from deep integration of temporal wisdom, contribute to patterns worthy of eternal recurrence. This is what Heidegger meant, Sarah says, her voice filled with the awe of ultimate recognition, when he said that human existence is the being for whom being itself is at issue. My choices about how to live are simultaneously choices about what reality itself becomes. The mirrors around her begin to harmonize, their separate reflections weaving together into a single, multifaceted vision of integrated temporal existence. Sarah sees herself not as a separate individual studying time from the outside, but as a temporal process becoming conscious of its own nature, a way that the universe develops the capacity to understand and choose its own evolution. She realizes that the knowledge she has gained in the Labyrinth is not something she possesses, but something she has become. The synthesis of Einstein's physics, Augustine's psychology, Heidegger's existentialism, quantum consciousness, and eternal recurrence has not just informed her intellect, it has transformed the very structure of her temporal existence. The final mirror in the hall is different from all the others. Instead of showing her various aspects of her relationship with time, it reflects her fully integrated temporal consciousness, the person she has become through her journey in the Labyrinth. She sees someone who understands viscerally that consciousness and cosmos are not separate, that individual existence and universal evolution are different scales of the same temporal process. But more than understanding, she sees someone who has learned to live this truth. The reflected Sarah moves through temporal existence with a quality of attention that honors both the fleeting nature of each moment and its eternal significance. She makes choices with awareness that each decision contributes to patterns that extend far beyond her individual life. She engages in relationships with recognition that love is the universe's way of integrating different temporal perspectives into larger wholes. This is who I have become, Sarah says to her reflection. Someone who knows that studying time and living time are not separate activities, but aspects of the same process of cosmic self-discovery. As she speaks these words, the mirrors begin to fade, their separate reflections dissolving into a single, clear surface that shows not her image but her essence, a consciousness that has learned to exist as a harmonious integration of all temporal dimensions, someone who embodies the synthesis she has achieved rather than merely understanding it intellectually. The hall transforms around her, revealing that it was never separate from herself. The mirrors were showing her different aspects of her own temporal consciousness, helping her recognize and integrate dimensions of her existence that she had previously experienced as separate or conflicting. She stands now in a space that is simultaneously the mirror hall and her own integrated consciousness, ready for the final stage of her journey. She understands that this last phase will not involve learning anything new, but rather embodying and sharing what she's become, finding ways to live and communicate the integrated understanding of time that she now represents. The path that opens before her glows not with external light, but with the radiance of her own transformed consciousness, leading toward the culmination of her journey through the labyrinth of time. Part 9, The Return. Time as Gift and Responsibility. Sarah walks through the final corridor of the labyrinth, carrying within herself the complete integration of temporal wisdom. The path ahead glows with the warm light of recognition rather than the mysterious luminescence that guided her initial explorations. She knows, with the certainty that comes from lived understanding rather than theoretical knowledge, that she is approaching not just the end of her journey, but its true beginning. The corridor opens into a space that is simultaneously familiar and transformed. She stands once again in her particle physics laboratory at CERN, but everything has changed. The same equipment lines the walls, the superconducting magnets, the quantum field generators, the monitoring displays, but now she sees them with eyes that understand their deeper significance. These are not just tools for manipulating matter and energy. They are instruments through which consciousness explores its own relationship to the fundamental structures of reality. James stands where she left him, his hand still extended toward the portal through which she departed, his face frozen in an expression of concern and wonder. But as Sarah steps fully back into ordinary space-time, temporal flow resumes its normal pace. James's expression shifts to relief, then amazement as he realizes that although subjectively she's been gone for what feels like months, objective time has barely advanced. "Sarah, you're back. But how long were you gone? It felt like you stepped through that shimmer and immediately stepped back out. But something about you is completely different." Sarah looks at her old friend and research partner with eyes that now see temporal existence from multiple dimensions simultaneously. She sees James not just as he appears in this moment, but as a temporal process, a consciousness integrating his own memories, attending to present possibilities, reaching toward future hopes and fears. She sees how a concern for her reflects the deep temporal bonds that connect conscious beings across their shared journey through time. "James," she says, her voice carrying new harmonics of understanding, "I've been exploring the nature of time itself, not just studying it as an abstract concept, but experiencing what it means to exist as a temporal being in a temporal universe." As she speaks, Sarah notices that the laboratory equipment is behaving differently than when she left. The supposed malfunction that created the temporal portal has stabilized into new patterns that reveal the deeper order underlying apparent chaos. The particle accelerator is generating what can only be described as organized complexity, patterns that suggest consciousness is not an accidental byproduct of physical processes, but an integral aspect of how the universe explores its own possibilities. "Look at the readings, James," Sarah says, gesturing toward the monitors that now display data streams of unprecedented elegance and coherence. What we interpreted as a malfunction was actually a breakthrough. The equipment has learned to collaborate with consciousness rather than simply manipulating unconscious matter. James stares at the displays, his scientific training warring with the evidence before his eyes. This is impossible. These patterns suggest that the quantum fields are responding to observation in ways that go far beyond the standard measurement problem. It's as if the universe is participating in our experiments rather than simply submitting to them. "That's exactly what's happening," Sarah replies, moving to the central console with fluid confidence. "Consciousness doesn't just observe reality from the outside. Consciousness is how reality observes itself, how the universe develops the capacity to understand and choose its own evolution." As she speaks, Sarah begins adjusting the experimental parameters, but not according to her old theoretical frameworks. Instead, she works with an intuitive understanding that integrates everything she learned in the Labyrinth, Einstein's insights about the geometry of space-time, Augustine's recognition of consciousness as temporal integration, Heidegger's analysis of authentic existence, the quantum nature of possibility, and the eternal recurrence of creative patterns. The laboratory responds to her transformed approach by revealing layers of organization that were previously hidden. Sarah and James watch in amazement as the quantum fields begin displaying what can only be called aesthetic patterns, configurations that are not just mathematically elegant, but genuinely beautiful, suggesting that the universe has an inherent tendency toward the creation of meaning and value. "Sarah, what happened to you in that place?" James asks, his voice filled with wonder and a touch of apprehension. "You're working with the equipment in ways I've never seen, and it's responding as if you're speaking a language it understands." Sarah pauses in her work, turned to face her colleague with eyes that hold depths of temporal understanding. "I learned that time is not just a dimension in which events occur. Time is a medium through which consciousness and cosmos co-evolve, the process through which the universe develops the capacity to understand and value its own existence." She gestures toward the experimental results flowing across their screens. "What we're seeing here is evidence that consciousness participates in physical processes from quantum level up. Every observation, every choice, every moment of authentic attention contributes to actualizing possibilities that serve the universe's deepest purposes." James struggles to integrate this perspective with a scientific worldview. But if that's true, then what we're doing here isn't just research. It's participation in cosmic evolution itself. Exactly, Sarah confirms. And this transforms everything about how we approach our work. We're not just trying to understand the universe from the outside. We're helping the universe understand itself from the inside. Our consciousness is how cosmic processes become self-aware. As if to confirm her words, the laboratory equipment begins generating new types of data. Information about a relationship between consciousness and physical processes that no previous experiment has been able to capture. Sarah realizes that her journey through the labyrinth has not just transformed her understanding. It has actually enhanced her capacity to participate in the universe's ongoing self-discovery. This is why I had to go through the labyrinth, she explains to James, even as part of her attention remains focused on the unprecedented experimental results. I needed to understand time not just as a physicist, but as a conscious being existing within temporal processes. That integration has changed how I relate to reality at every level. Over the following hours, Sarah shares with James the insight she gained from her encounters with Einstein, Augustine, Heidegger, and the other dimensions of temporal understanding she explored. But she discovers that communicating the depth of her transformation is impossible through words alone. The synthesis she achieved must be lived rather than simply described. James, she says finally, I know this sounds incredible, but I think the portal is still active, not as a malfunction, but as a doorway that consciousness can open when it's ready to explore deeper levels of temporal existence. If you're willing, you could experience what I've experienced. James stares at the shimmer that still glows softly at the center of the laboratory, his expression cycling between scientific skepticism and profound curiosity. Are you suggesting that temporal exploration is something any consciousness can undertake? I think it's something every consciousness must undertake. Eventually, Sarah replies. The universe is developing toward greater self-awareness, and that development happens through individual consciousnesses learning to integrate temporal wisdom. My journey was just one path through the labyrinth. There are as many paths as there are conscious beings. As they work together over the following days, Sarah discovers that her transformation continues to unfold. The integration of temporal wisdom she achieved in the labyrinth is not a static accomplishment, but a dynamic process that deepens her capacity to participate consciously in cosmic evolution. Her research takes on new dimensions. Instead of studying time as an external phenomenon, she begins investigating how consciousness and temporality co-evolve, how the universe develops greater capacity for meaning and beauty through the evolution of temporal awareness. Her equations become more like poetry, capturing not just mathematical relationships, but the aesthetic principles that guide cosmic development. Her relationships also transform. With James, she develops a quality of friendship that honors both individual autonomy and collaborative participation in larger purposes. She learns to be present with colleagues, friends, and family in ways that recognize each interaction as an opportunity for temporal consciousness to understand itself more deeply. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah discovers that her individual transformation contributes to patterns that extend far beyond her personal existence. Other researchers begin reporting similar experiences, moments when the boundary between consciousness and cosmos becomes permeable, when scientific investigation becomes indistinguishable from spiritual exploration, when the study of time reveals itself as participation in time's own self-understanding. We're witnessing the emergence of a new phase of human consciousness, Sarah writes in her research journal. A phase where the artificial separation between subjective and objective, between consciousness and cosmos, between spiritual and scientific, dissolves into integrated understanding. Years pass, but Sarah's relationship to temporal flow has been permanently transformed. She experiences each moment as simultaneously ephemeral and eternal, recognizing that her choices in the present moment contribute to patterns that will recur across cosmic cycles. She lives with awareness that her consciousness is both utterly individual and deeply interconnected with the universal process of temporal self-discovery. The laboratory becomes a kind of temple where the sacred and scientific dimensions of reality are recognized as aspects of a single truth. Students and researchers come from around the world to learn not just about temporal physics, but about how to integrate scientific understanding with wisdom about conscious existence and time. Sarah realizes that her return from the labyrinth was not the end of her journey, but its transformation into a way of living. Every moment becomes an opportunity to embody the synthesis she achieved, to demonstrate through her existence that consciousness and cosmos are not separate entities, but aspects of a single temporal process, exploring its own infinite possibilities. Time is not something we have, she often tells her students, echoing insights that have become part of her being. Time is something we are, and by learning to exist authentically as temporal beings, integrating memory, attention, and expectation, making choices that honor both finitude and eternity, participating consciously in the universe's ongoing evolution, we help time itself develop toward ever greater capacity for meaning, beauty, and love. Standing in her transformed laboratory, watching new generations of researchers begin their own journeys toward temporal understanding, Sarah knows that her passage through the labyrinth has fulfilled its deepest purpose. She has learned not just to study time, but to live time consciously, to exist as a way that the universe comes to understand and choose its own temporal nature. The shimmer at the center of the laboratory continues to glow softly, ready for other consciousnesses to begin their own explorations of the labyrinth of time. And Sarah continues her work, knowing that each moment of authentic temporal existence contributes to the universe's eternal project of learning to love itself through the creative evolution of consciousness and time. The return is complete, but the journey continues forever.